This video is sponsored by Chepeku. We are in a new golden age for fantasy TTRPGs. The last few years have seen the release of not only a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, but also the premiere of a whole bunch of other brand new role-playing games that have taken the community by storm. Games like Shadowdark, Daggerheart, and Draw Steel, just to name a few. Independent games like Moorpark are also doing better than ever. If you are a new TTRPG player getting into the hobby for the first time, you are spoiled for choice. However, if you spend a bit of time in online spaces, then you might know that beneath the surface of this typically completely normal and very well-adjusted community, there's a war going on. A civil war waging across the hobby. Brother versus brother, player versus player, system versus system. We are in the middle of another edition war. Only this time, it's not being waged by people who just don't like the new version of D&D. Instead, it's actually a war between the players of specific games fighting against each other in the trenches of comment sections and social media posts. And there's an added component to this battle. It's no longer just about which game you prefer to play or whether you approve of the direction D&D is taking, but it's also about which company you feel you can support, whether it's ethical to play the game you enjoy when you don't approve of the actions of their parent company, and whether or not there's even ethical consumption under capitalism. Now, I want to be clear, right here at the top. Most people are not part of this edition war. Even if you strongly agree with a lot of the opinions held by its fiercest warriors, even if you strongly feel that other people should not be playing a certain game for moral reasons, most people are still normal enough to realize it's not worth spending a lot of time getting angry on the internet over this. The whole civil war rhetoric, it's a framing device. It's not really as bad as I'm making it sound. I'm well aware that this is a problem that really only exists in Reddit threads and comment sections, and since I engage with those spaces every day, I see those sorts of talking points more often than most normal people do. And even then, the vitriol of this war has started to die down over the past year, and I think maybe it's evolving into something a little bit more productive, and we will talk about that later in this video. We're going to talk about why that happened. But when you're in these online spaces and you talk about D&D, you probably are still going to find soldiers in this new edition war. And unfortunately, this modern edition war cannot have a winner. At least not in any way that will make the edition warriors happy. All that's going to happen is that some people are going to get really frustrated and bitter, and they're going to vent and lash out at other people in Reddit threads and on social media and in YouTube comment sections.
Please don't tell me you made this entire video just to complain about YouTube comments.
No, definitely not. Like I said, we're past the era where I was getting these sorts of comments every week, and even when I was, like, it wasn't exactly newsworthy when someone in the YouTube comment section said something in a weird, dickish way. But I've seen edition wars come and go, and I think we can learn a lot from how this one started and where it might go next. So, no, when you showed up in my last video and you called me a shill for Wizards of the Coast, that's not because you're some straw man that I intend to dismantle and shut down. Your comments actually opened the door to what I hope will be an interesting, and maybe even nuanced, discussion about the current state of the hobby. Plus, if we're talking about a civil war in a community, you are the perfect person to talk to, right?
Okay, once again, I'm not actually the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. I am the angel of change. I just happen to look like a penny. We talked about this in the last video, remember?
Of course, I forgot. So, yeah, this is a video about the modern edition war, why it's so different from the edition wars of eras past, and what that means for the future of the hobby. This video was actually chosen by my patrons as part of a poll. It was actually part of a tie. You'll see the other winner next month. But there's another poll up there right now where you can help decide another video I'm going to talk about on this channel. You have until the end of the month to get your votes in, so if you become a patron or a YouTube member at the Fabricate tier, you can vote on polls for future videos. I'm trying to post a new poll every other month or so, but even if you join the Patreon at lower levels, you can still get access to videos whenever I finish them early. You'll get the ad-free versions of the videos. You get to participate in Patreon-exclusive live streams where I'll answer your questions directly, and I'll give you a look at the making of the videos, a little behind-the-scenes look sometimes. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider checking out the Patreon. I would really appreciate it. Now let's get on with the show. To start things off, we should really define our terms. What is an edition war? Well, historically, an edition war is what happens when a new edition of D&D comes out, and some fans of the previous edition are pissed that a new one came out. And specifically, an edition war happens when those fans cannot be normal about it. We'll talk later about why this modern edition war is so different, but that's the baseline. That was the normal understanding of what an edition war was for most of the hobby's history. Edition wars are waged by edition warriors. And specifically, these are the people who do not like the new edition, they are incredibly critical of it, and they are critical of anybody who chooses to play it. This is important to note. An edition war is not generally waged by both sides, by fans of the new edition and loyalists of the old one. Historically, an edition war is just the term we use for when a bunch of edition warriors are just being assholes about a new version of the game. Now, I want to be extremely clear. I don't think any version of any game is immune to criticism. If you don't like 5.5, or if you didn't like 5th edition, or you didn't like 4th edition, or 3.5, or 3rd edition, or any earlier edition of the game, if you didn't like some or all of those games, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with making your arguments as persuasively as you can and being critical of the design of a game. That's not what makes you an edition warrior. If you feel an earlier edition did a better job of capturing what excites you about D&D, that also does not necessarily make you an edition warrior. If you have no interest in switching to the new edition, that does not make you an edition warrior either. Even if you think the new game sucks and everyone who worked on it was a talentless hack, well, we're certainly getting closer, but I think just expressing your dislike for a product, even in a dickish way, is not necessarily what makes you an edition warrior. From my perspective, this is my definition, it's going to be useful to understand for this video, but hopefully you'll agree with it as well. I feel like an edition warrior doesn't just prefer an older version of the game, they want the new one to fail. And they can't just accept that some people like the new game and that's fine. They automatically view anyone who likes the new game as a fake fan, or maybe even as a full-on stupid or worthless person. That's more optional than just the definition of wanting the new version to fail, but I think both would qualify you as an edition warrior. Either one would. And originally, I was going to go into a lot more detail about this, talking about what sorts of behavior defines an edition warrior and how we can kind of recognize them when we see them, but then I realized there's actually a really easy example that helps explain who an edition warrior is. Snyder Bros. Edition warriors across the history of D&D basically act exactly the same way as diehard Snyder Bros who are still talking about restoring the Snyderverse. And yes, there are guys who still do that. And again, I want to draw a distinction. Edition warriors aren't just people who like an earlier edition or prefer an earlier edition, just like anyone who enjoys a Zack Snyder movie or even prefers Man of Steel to the new Superman movie is not automatically a Snyder bro. Even if they like the bad Snyder movies, that does not make them a Snyder bro. The Snyder bros are specifically the small, annoying cluster of assholes who are actively rooting for the new DC universe to fail, either because they want the Snyderverse to come back, or if they know that's not going to happen, they just want it to fail out of petty spite that the version they like was ultimately abandoned. D&D's edition warriors are exactly the same way. There's not usually petitions or bus bench ads or billboards or anything like that, but the way Snyder Bros behave these days when the new DC movies are in full swing, that's basically exactly how edition warriors operate. Trashing every new release, sight unseen, lamenting the very existence of the new version of the game, and if you say you enjoyed some new product, they direct their venom towards you. Now, on the one hand, I do genuinely understand the mindset behind an edition warrior. D&D is a social game. You need people to play it with. The more people playing the game you like, the more games you can play, the better the strength of your hobby. If you have a lot of Magic the Gathering cards and you play all the time, but then literally everybody else in the world all stops playing the game at the same time and they all move on to a different game instead, then you're not a Magic player anymore. You're just a collector. Unless Magic the Gathering has a single player mode that I'm not aware of, that's very possible, but I think you understand the point I'm making. It's in your best interest to make sure that the version of the game you play has as many other players as possible so you can still play with lots of other people. However, unlike a video game where any update that comes along basically makes it very difficult to get your hands on the older version of the game, you can keep playing older versions of D&D and other RPGs as much as you want. It might be more difficult for new players to pick up an older version of the game when the new edition is so much more prevalent, but copies of the old game are still out there, and most former versions of the game can still be purchased online. That's why you can keep playing your preferred version of the game, and most people would not call you an edition warrior for doing that. You're just a satisfied customer. You're happy with the product you got, you're in no rush to replace it with something else. If I buy a dishwasher, and the company releases a new version of the same dishwasher, but I don't run out and buy it, I'm not being a dishwasher edition warrior. I have the dishwasher I need, and I'm happy with it, so I'm in no hurry to buy another one right now. Likewise, if you keep playing an older version of the game, that's obviously completely fine. Wizards of the Coast is not entitled to your money just because they put out a new version of the game. If you're still happy with the version you have, do your thing. Now, you might have to make your peace with the fact that you won't get as much institutional support as you used to. New adventures might not be compatible with your version of the game, and, of course, as we learned during 4th edition, the digital systems that support your version of the game are eventually going to go away. I'll never forget you, 4th edition encounter builder. But, as long as you've got your books or a PDF, you can keep playing your version of the game forever. But the edition warrior can't accept that answer. And that's the point where they cross the line from someone I can sympathize with, or empathize with? I always get those mixed up. But that's when they cross over to being someone who I just roll my eyes at. Because ultimately, the edition warriors don't just hate change. everyone hates change a little bit, but they're also taking it out on the wrong people. And they have an end goal that is basically impossible. And the best thing to do with an Edition Warrior, historically, has just been to ignore them. After all, there's a difference between Edition Warriors and the people I consider to be Edition Ambassadors. Edition Ambassadors might make thoughtful videos or blog posts or forum posts addressing the issues they have with the latest edition and pointing out maybe that some older editions had good ideas that solved these same problems. Edition Warriors just insist the new edition is wrong and bad, and if you play it, you are also wrong and bad. Edition Ambassadors try to say something substantial about how different editions promote different playstyles, and might be critical of the fact that it is harder to run older, classic adventures in newer editions because the new version of the game just doesn't support the same playstyle that the older versions of the game did. Edition Warriors just insist that if the new edition doesn't seem to support their preferred playstyle, then the game is a failure and the hobby is dying. Edition Ambassadors invite you to play their preferred edition. Edition Warriors just sit on the sidelines and slag off anybody they consider to be an interloper ruining their hobby. And if you're an Edition Ambassador and you're just trying to introduce the game you like to your friends, like a good normal person would, then no matter what version of the game you're playing, or even what game you're playing in the first place, you might need some maps, which is why this video is sponsored by Cheipeku. Cheipeku is the fantastic team behind some of the best maps in the business, with a truly incredible selection of fantasy and sci-fi maps, and new maps coming out all the time. They've got maps you can print out for your home games or drop right into your VTT of choice, including animated maps so you can truly bring your scenes to life. I actually use these maps in my own home game, and I can just choose an environment, like desert, and flip through the selections and find any map in that category that inspires me for a new adventure. And each map comes with lots of different variations, so if a particular map seems close to my needs, but not quite what I'm looking for, I can flip through all the available variations and find something that works even better. It's truly a fantastic way to make sure my players feel immersed in the game, and it empowers the players to take bigger swings when they have such excellent maps that can do a wonderful job of representing the world of the game for them. And if you visit go.cheipeku.com/supergeekmike, you can save 50% off your first order. Once again, that's go.cheipeku.com/supergeekmike, link in the description, and save 50% off your first order. Thank you so much to Cheipeku for sponsoring this video. Now, look, when we're talking about these historical edition wars and the way they've been waged, you really don't need to pay edition warriors any mind. Ultimately, they're just mad that the game they like is changing and that it's leaving them behind. But that's silly. Like I said earlier, with a hobby like D&D, you can keep playing your preferred version of the game forever and be completely happy and not be an edition warrior trying to spoil anybody else's fun. Yes, it's frustrating when the hobby changes in a way that you don't agree with. That's frustrating in any hobby that you love. But that's just part of life, man. You can absolutely still be frustrated by that in your own way. But the last thing you should do is take it out on the people who enjoy the new version of the game, and especially not the new players getting into the hobby for the first time. Don't mess with those guys. That is not cool. And honestly, what are Edition Warriors hoping to gain? An Edition Ambassador has a very clear goal: to point out that a previous edition had good stuff going on, and to encourage you to check it out if it seems like it might be your vibe. But if all Edition Warriors want is for the new edition to fail, then what does that actually get them? It's not going to bring back their beloved preferred edition. Is it just to punish the publishers for making a new one? What's their win condition? What's their end game? With most edition wars, there is none. But sometimes the circumstances are a bit different. Sometimes they aren't just ranting because their old version of the game isn't being published anymore. Sometimes there actually are multiple competing versions of the game being published at the same time. And an Edition Warrior's end goal in that situation is for their preferred game to come out on top. This is sort of what happened between basic D&D and AD&D. This is a lot more complicated than that, but very, very simply, for a long time, there were actually two different versions of D&D being published by the same company. And you know what, even though I still think the whole concept of an edition war is very, very silly, at least in this case, there were two competing products that were still both being published, which was not the case with most other edition wars that would follow. When 3rd edition came out, the 2nd edition warriors couldn't really win ever. 2nd edition wasn't being published anymore. Obviously, you can keep playing your preferred game, like I've already said a bunch of times. You can even be an edition ambassador and try to invite people to play the game you think is superior, but there's really no other possible win condition. D&D isn't going backwards. But with basic D&D versus advanced D&D, you had the product you preferred and you wanted more players to play that one. So I guess the win condition for those edition warriors might be that everybody just plays the version of the game you like and TSR just doesn't have to publish the other one anymore. If that's what they actually hoped would happen, it still seems kind of silly to me, but you know what? At least there's a clear goal there, and that makes sense. Contrast that with any edition warriors who preferred 2nd edition over 3rd edition. A new company had just taken over the game, Wizards of the Coast. They had totally rewritten the rules. The game was now completely unrecognizable in a lot of ways. But when these Edition Warriors started making a stink, what did they actually hope was going to happen? Did they think Wizards of the Coast was going to go back to the old game that the Edition Warriors preferred? Did they just want support for both games at the same time, like we had with basic D&D and AD&D simultaneously? Or were they literally just mad? They didn't know what to do with that anger, so they took it out on everybody else. I suppose I just don't know that answer because I'm not an Edition Warrior. You'd have to actually ask an Edition Warrior from that era what they hoped would happen. And maybe this is the benefit of hindsight talking, but it doesn't seem like there was ever a chance that those Edition Warriors were ever going to get what they wanted. 3rd edition was not going anywhere anytime soon, and certainly Wizards of the Coast had no interest in going backwards. All the Edition Warriors managed to do was alienate themselves from the new people entering the community. Meanwhile, the Edition Ambassadors were still playing older editions, or they were going off and making their own games, which were strikingly similar to, yet legally distinct from, basic D&D or AD&D. Which reminds me, when 4th edition came out, there were absolutely a lot of Edition Warriors who hated that game. I don't know if there were more than with previous editions, or if they were just more visible thanks to the way the internet was changing, but man, those Edition Warriors were inescapable. And part of that was because a lot of people didn't like the game. Edition Warriors had a healthy home there. Obviously, most people who didn't like 4E were not Edition Warriors, but the negativity towards 4th edition was so strong, the soil was fertile, and Edition Warriors were able to flourish. Now, 4th edition still sold pretty well, but it didn't sell as well as Wizards of the Coast wanted it to. And it was so hated in online nerd circles, it was basically radioactive to discuss. So it's looked back on as a failure. Now, did the Edition Warriors have a win condition, or were they just mad? Ultimately, it doesn't matter, because this Edition War actually changed everything. You see, Paizo was another game design company that had been making material for 3.5, official material commissioned by Wizards of the Coast, but then WotC took the license away as they switched editions. And that sucked for Paizo, obviously. Now they had to figure out how they were going to make products so they could keep the lights on. So they created Pathfinder, which at first really was just 3.5 again, because that way they could keep writing 3.5 adventures just like they had been doing for years, but now they could actually control the game itself. And obviously now there would actually be a game still being published that they could provide adventures to support. And suddenly, this Edition War had actual stakes again. Now, once again, there were two competing products. Only this time they weren't being published by the same company, they were competitors. The war between basic D&D versus advanced D&D was sort of like a box office rivalry between Avengers Endgame and Avatar. Either way, Disney wins. You can absolutely still have your preference for whichever product you prefer. You might even argue that there's a ideological or moral reason for your preference, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because you're all part of the audience for the same company, just for different products. However, Pathfinder versus D&D was an actual rivalry, it seemed. Now, as has been clarified, Pathfinder never actually defeated D&D in sales, but they sort of won the popular vote in the fandom. Pathfinder was far and away much more popular, especially in online discourse, where the majority of edition wars actually take place. And while I think 4th edition wasn't nearly as bad as people said it was, like, it was flawed, but ultimately it was still fun, but it had two major strikes against it. First, it didn't feel like D&D to a lot of people. I think it's probably true in just about every edition war on some level. It's really just about which playstyle you prefer and which edition of the game best supports that style. But 4th edition was also compared a lot to World of Warcraft, something Mike Mearls has more or less confirmed they were consciously aware of when they were designing 4th edition. And the argument that they're making D&D into a video game is a very compelling narrative, even if it's incomplete or oversimplified. But that's the perfect environment for an edition war. The people in charge, the head honchos, are trying to ruin our game by turning it into a video game. Fantastic way to convert people into being edition warriors. But the second big strike against 4th edition was that it was being published by the larger corporation, Wizards of the Coast, a subsidiary of Hasbro, and Pathfinder was the underdog. It wasn't just about which game you preferred, but you could also rationalize your preference through moral reasons. I'm not just supporting the version of the game I prefer, I'm also deliberately not giving money to the big evil corporation. You see where I'm going with this, right? Now, when 5th edition came out, it was a huge hit, and weirdly there was another edition war here, but not between 4E and 5E, but between Pathfinder and 5E. Pathfinder fans got this reputation for being really unpleasant, dropping in everyone's replies and DMs whenever anyone mentioned D&D in any way, and insisting you should play Pathfinder instead. In 2019, Pathfinder got a second edition, so they had to deal with their own internal edition war, but when that was over, fans of Pathfinder 2 were so proud of the final product they got, something that really felt like modern design, still iterating on 3.5, but in a way that left behind a lot of the frustrating holdovers of D&D just being a legacy product. Gone were the ability scores that did nothing but generate your modifiers, gone was alignment, gone were bonus actions. Pathfinder fans were really happy, and if you were an edition ambassador for Pathfinder, you had a really strong sales pitch. But if you were a Pathfinder edition warrior, man, you were insufferable. And again, I understand where they're coming from. These were no longer people who were just afraid of change and mad about it. Now they felt like their preferred version of the game was on the cutting edge of game design, and essentially represented the future of the hobby. And so it was really frustrating for them to see other people just ignore that game in favor of D&D. But eventually, over the next couple of years, Pathfinder Edition Warriors seemed to realize they weren't getting anywhere by being obnoxious. So a lot of them essentially converted and became Edition Ambassadors instead. This was especially important because of how big 5th Edition got. Most D&D players now didn't know anything about Pathfinder. They weren't there for the last Edition War because they were all new to the hobby. So if all they knew were that Pathfinder fans were annoying, they just popped up in your replies all the time and said, "You should play Pathfinder instead." That's not helpful. They don't have enough context to know what you're talking about or why you care about that game, so you're not getting anywhere. So it seems like the Pathfinder Edition Warriors just cooled off, because posting "just play Pathfinder" doesn't help anybody. Likewise, old school gamers were kind of in a similar camp. They kept making games that were heavily inspired by the earliest editions of D&D, and that flourished. It became the old school renaissance, the OSR. But once again, while there are definitely still plenty of Edition Warriors in the OSR, generally speaking, when you're selling people on a new game, you have to remember that most D&D players have never heard of it. So if all you say is, "Well, my favorite game is so much better," end of sentence, that doesn't tell anyone anything useful. Or even if you say something like, "Well, that's not real D&D. Real D&D is..." It's not going to get anywhere. The Edition Ambassadors got a lot further because they learned how to actually sell the games they enjoyed. But of course, whether it was Pathfinder or the many OSR games, one shared selling point was the fact that none of these other games were owned and operated by Wizards of the Coast, a subsidiary of Hasbro, a giant faceless corporation. If you're supporting these other games, you're supporting a small business, and not the big boogeyman. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because about 3 years ago, Wizards of the Coast tried to revoke the OGL, the open gaming license that allows other creators to make content for D&D without risk of legal action. And for one single moment, about less than 30 days, the entire RPG hobby and community was united against Wizards of the Coast. And after that very, very frustrating month, WotC retreated and withdrew their plans to revoke the OGL, and the industry was essentially saved. But in the aftermath, there were plenty of people who just did not want to deal with Wizards of the Coast anymore. And unfortunately, WotC did not make that proposition any more tantalizing, considering that with 2023 and 2024, there were lots of other very public blunders and PR disasters and unforced errors. But fortunately, in the aftermath of the OGL crisis, there was this brand new wave of new RPGs, as a bunch of other publishers found themselves in the exact same position that Paizo was in back in the late 2000s. All these companies and independent designers that had been making content for D&D suddenly had this real scare. There's this chance that everything could have been taken away from them. So they weren't quite in the same spot as Paizo, where that actually literally happened to them, but all of them saw their careers flash before their eyes. And rather than risk that happening again, a lot of them just started working on their own games. It's been a couple years now, most of those games have been released, and most RPG players are eating really, really well these days. It's funny, this week as I was working on this video, Mystic Arts and Mike Shea from Sly Flourish both put out a video where they each talked about how many fantastic games we have now, and how this hobby is maybe the healthiest it's ever been. If you just like dope RPGs, you've got plenty to choose from. This is a wonderful time. However, for some people, a few people, that's not enough. And this is where I want to talk about the new Edition War. That's how we got here, but let's understand why it cannot be won. Because the modern Edition Warriors aren't necessarily advocates of any of these games. They're really just opponents of Wizards of the Coast. And that's completely fine. Corporations are not your friend. You probably should hate Hasbro. But some people just will not be happy until another game can come along and overthrow D&D. The common term we all used when these new RPGs were being developed was to refer to them as Dragon Slayers, because all of them were essentially competing for D&D's audience. And there was definitely a sentiment, especially in 2023, that people really wanted to see D&D get overthrown. They wanted another game to be the biggest game in the industry. But that's not going to happen. And most of us, I think, probably knew that. We've definitely accepted that. But the Edition Warriors have not. For example, let's talk a little bit about Daggerheart. This is the new RPG designed by the folks at Critical Role. I like this game. I've talked about it on the channel before. I think it's a really cool RPG with a lot going for it. I've got more to say about it in future videos. But in the lead up to Daggerheart being released, there was this sort of nervous anticipation in a lot of corners of the community. Critical Role is the biggest actual play show in the world. They're publishing their own game. They're going to play it on stream. What is that going to mean for D&D's sales? Is it possible they will finally get somebody who can overthrow D&D's dominance in the market? That was a very seductive idea. One can't help but wonder how much influence and power the biggest influencers in the hobby might actually have. But it turns out, Critical Role decided to play D&D 5.5 for Campaign 4, so at least for right now, we're not going to see what happens when they run their own game on their big flagship show. And for some people, they view that as a surrender. Well, they're certainly not going to overthrow D&D now, so why even buy the game if the creators abandoned it? But they have not abandoned Daggerheart at all. It's still going really strong. Yes, I also think it's kind of weird they aren't playing Daggerheart for Campaign 4. Absolutely seems like a weird business choice. And to me, it kind of says some troubling things about the state of the actual play market and what those audiences are actually looking for. As someone who thinks a lot about actual play shows and really wants to see that corner of the community be able to expand to other games, that's the part that really frustrates me. But as a Daggerheart fan, I don't really care. I don't mind that it's not being played by Critical Role. Most games aren't played by Critical Role. The game is still fun, and there's a lot of really cool supplements on the way for that game because the designers are absolutely still interested in creating really cool stuff for that game. I've pre-ordered my copy of Hope and Fear. I'm excited to watch Age of Umbra Season 2. I'm eagerly looking forward to the new settings from Keith Baker and the setting and adventure from Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford. I'm especially looking forward to the Romantasy setting inspired by Tusk Love. I really want to see how they handle romance mechanics in Daggerheart. But this was such a telling moment for me when there was this huge backlash of people who were like, well, I don't care about Daggerheart anymore because they're not playing on a Critical Role. That really revealed to me how many people aren't looking for a new cool game that they can just play and enjoy. They just want something to overthrow D&D. And if it doesn't look like it's going to happen, they bail on it. But there is never going to be another game that comes along and challenges D&D, not even to the same level that Pathfinder did. There will never be another game that seems to win a new edition war. To understand why, let's briefly talk about Harry Potter. You see, millennials love to mention Harry Potter. We use it as the shorthand for lots of things when we're communicating with each other because we all grew up reading those books and watching those movies. We all know the references. People my age really love those books. They genuinely ignited a passion for reading in lots of kids when I was growing up. Kids felt rewarded for reading because if you were an avid reader, you kept getting these new installments in this engaging franchise. And apparently people like the movies too. I don't really get that part. Even during the middle of Pottermania, when I was the target audience, I always thought the cast was great, but the movies were fine. The fourth one's the best one. But people still use Harry Potter as shorthand because it's something that we all understand. Everyone in our age group basically knew Harry Potter backwards and forwards. It was a very formative book series. And so anytime you see a millennial make a reference to Harry Potter on social media or any YouTube video, they're using it as an example of a trope or a story structure or comparing someone in the current administration to some wizard Nazi, you'll see somebody in the comments going like, God, millennials really never read another book series besides Harry Potter. They never read another book besides the Harry Potter series. But that's not true. Millennials read lots of other books and lots of other book series. They just didn't all go on to read the same book series. Some of them moved on to other young adult dystopias like The Hunger Games or Maze Runner or, I presume, Divergent. Statistically speaking, somebody must have read Divergent. Others went on to read more young adult fantasy like Twilight. Others became avid fans of adult fantasy like Game of Thrones or The Kingkiller Chronicles or Brandon Sanderson. Others didn't stick with fantasy at all, but still went on to be avid readers in general. Like, I got really into comic books. My sister reads really depressing nonfiction like Radium Girls. My wife reads very spicy romance novels. Millennials read lots of things besides Harry Potter. The problem was, there was never going to be a next Harry Potter. If we look at TV, they're struggling with exactly the same thing. Everyone wants to make the next Game of Thrones, and it's never going to happen. A sea of streaming services destroyed the monoculture, so we're not all watching the same things anymore, and given how advanced visual effects have become and how much more common they are on TV, you're also never going to recreate the novelty of seeing dragons on TV for the first time. You can make a show for Game of Thrones fans. You can make several shows for people who like Game of Thrones. That show is very popular. Lots of people watch that show. Most of them will watch other shows too. But no show will be the next Game of Thrones because nobody is all watching the same thing anymore. And D&D is the same way. Lots of people will play another game instead of D&D, or alongside D&D. None of those other games are ever going to overthrow D&D. The best case scenario is that each studio is able to convert their little corner of the 5e audience to their own game. But D&D's audience is huge now, and new people join the hobby every day. Something like Daggerheart is the perfect example. You're probably never going to get every Critical Role viewer to buy that game, but if they can get the people who buy their merch regularly to buy their new game and keep playing it, that's huge. That's enough to keep your company afloat for a long time. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to D&D's audience. All these other games could probably peel off a huge chunk of their audience away from 5e and towards their new products, and WotC would never even notice. And that should be wonderful news. For most of us, it is. the hobby has become so large and so healthy, all of these other games can pop up and start thriving and building their own communities based off the success of the past 10 years of 5th edition. And quite frankly, as these games have actually started getting published, you've had edition warriors who wanted to see D&D fail, finally getting their hands on some new games, and becoming edition ambassadors for the games they like the best. They're no longer arguing that D&D has to fall, they're instead just making a sales pitch for the game they like. And that's what I meant in the introduction when I said that this edition war is starting to burn itself out. As these games are getting released, people are starting to play them, starting to run longer campaigns using them, and starting to make the switch to only run those games, or to run them alongside. But the hatred for Wizards of the Coast is being replaced by support for these other games. And that's great. But for some people, it's not enough. They don't just want a new cool game they can play, they want a game that will defeat D&D. For a while, a lot of us got very swept up with that idea. It was very tantalizing. But I think a lot of us are starting to realize that that's not the best metric for success, because it's not really achievable. And even if it does happen, it would be wildly out of the publisher's control. But what you can do is publish a game that can stand on its own 2 feet and support your company, and maybe even develop a community around it. For most publishers, that's enough. For most players, that's enough. For the ones who weren't satisfied with that, well, they're still waging the new Modern Edition war, and it can never be won. But there's another aspect of this as well, which is, once again, just like the Pathfinder war, each of these games is being published by a different company. So it's not just about which game you like, it's also about which company or independent designer you think best deserves your money. You've got D&D 5.5, owned by a massive corporation, but still, I think, a really solid product, and you have to navigate how you feel about that. You've got Daggerheart from Critical Role's publishing arm, Darrington Press, and if you've been around this hobby for a little bit, you don't need me to tell you that a lot of people have very strong positive feelings about the folks at Critical Role, and they want to support whatever they do. Matt Colville's company, MCDM, is also really well regarded in the community, not just because of all of his years of fantastic advice videos, but also because MCDM makes really well-reviewed products and they pay their contributors really well. So if you're looking to support a more ethical and reliable company, they've got a great reputation. You've got something like Shadowdark, basically produced by one woman along with a few contributors, so you're supporting an independent creator, but you're also supporting someone who's written a lot of really well-reviewed adventures as well. Pathfinder's parent company, Paizo, is not exactly a small fish compared to most game studios, but they absolutely have a much better reputation in the community than something like Wizards of the Coast does. I'm sure there are other people who can more articulately speak to the pros and cons of Paizo as a company, but Pathfinder has basically always been free to access, at least as far as I'm aware, because they have always been much more open about the fact that they know they're not owed your money, and that's always going to foster a good reputation with your potential customers. And the list of other games goes on beyond there. I'm sure there are lots of other games that you might want to support because of the designers behind them, or the reputation of the studio that produces them. But once again, this means there's another very tempting argument in this new Modern Edition war. If you support D&D, you're supporting the big evil corporation that tried to destroy the hobby. See, edition wars, by their very nature, are waged by the fans. When you have these other companies making competing products, you start to think that there's this moral imperative to overthrow the evil corporation publishing D&D to play the better game. Not just better in design, which is subjective, but I'm sure many people feel that the games they like are better designed than D&D, but also the better game because it's not being made by the evil corporation. And again, I'm absolutely not going to say that corporations are our friends. They absolutely are not. And if you feel that Wizards of the Coast has forever broken your trust, fair, good, don't trust corporations. I'm not saying that you did, but like, we don't owe them our trust. If that means you're not going to keep giving them money, fair enough. That's perfectly reasonable. But for some people, it's not enough to just decide that you're not going to spend your own money on a company you don't support. You have to lash out at anybody else who does. It's a new justification for the same mindset we see in every edition war. How dare you play this game? You're a bad person for playing that game. And we'll talk more about the ethics of supporting D&D in a minute. I don't want to dismiss that point entirely, by any means. But when we're talking about this war between these different games, I think it's important to remember that's how the fans feel, the diehard fans especially, but I don't think that's how the designers feel at all. I don't think they're at war. The folks who made Daggerheart are playing D&D 5.5 on their big actual play channel. Matt Colville's company published a competing RPG to D&D, and he still made a whole video about edition wars and why the switch to 5.5 is not that big a deal. He basically said that you could keep playing D&D, and you probably will switch to 5.5, while he was also preparing the crowdfunder for his own competing game. That's not an act of war by any means. All these other companies, MCDM, Cobalt Press, Paizo, they all have their own RPGs that are specifically competitors with D&D, and yet they're getting their 5e material published on D&D Beyond. They're happily working with the enemy because they're not enemies. Nobody's at war. Yes, obviously WotC is probably putting those products up on D&D Beyond for shameless corporate reasons. They want to have more 5e products on their website without spending the money to make those products themselves, because they know if they can get you to buy these other adventures through their official site, you'll be on the platform for longer. They can make you more reliable D&D Beyond customers and make D&D Beyond more essential to your play experience. It's absolutely a calculated move. But these game designers also get something out of that. They're aware of the calculation that Wizards of the Coast is doing, but also, from their perspective, the rising tide lifts all ships. And while the Edition Warriors might hope there's a lot more animosity between those companies, there's not. Now, that being said, what does this all mean in terms of whether or not it's reasonable to support Wizards of the Coast and keep playing D&D? Now, not everyone's going to feel the same way about this, but my personal feeling is I was very much in favor of a boycott during the OGL, because we were trying to send a very clear message to the company that we weren't going to support them if they went through with their plans. But even during that time frame, I didn't think people had to stop running their D&D games. Just until the situation's resolved, let's not give them any more of our money. Once that crisis ended, I considered that boycott over. I think somebody's a bad person if they buy a D&D book, just like I don't think you're a bad person if you buy a video game made by a studio that has a really poor reputation of worker exploitation or something like that. If you want to refrain from buying from those studios, that's completely valid, totally get it, but I just don't think it's helpful to address your animosity towards the fans when it's much more important to put that pressure on the company. And no, not all situations are created equal. This is not my universal approach to any problematic creator. Like, most of us understand that buying any Harry Potter merch in 2026 is pretty unethical, because despite the fact that most of her modern collaborators just want to frame her as having some controversial comments that they don't support, she's using her platform to spread active harm and literal hatred. It doesn't really matter how badly you want that Harry Potter wand, or that Hogwarts cookbook, or that Diagon Alley welcome mat, or that Dobby-shaped butt plug. You don't need to support that franchise financially, and doing so is actively giving money to someone who is not only spreading hateful anti-trans rhetoric, but also using her enormous platform to push through hateful anti-trans legislation. The boycott on J.K. Rowling is not over, and when I see somebody still excited about Harry Potter merch, they get the side eye from me where I wonder, okay, do you just not know how bad this is? Or do you know and you don't care? And you know what? I don't think we have anybody nearly as bad as J.K. Rowling, but there are definitely a few creators in the RPG community who have been blacklisted due to their own abusive behavior, for example. But outside of those specific individuals, with most other situations, I think it's completely fine to draw your own lines about what you will and you will not support. Unless there's really and truly an organized boycott, like there was around D&D during the OGL crisis, then I just don't think it's worth being an Edition Warrior rooting for the fall of D&D and railing against anybody who buys their books. But then again, for some D&D players, that boycott is not over either. And when they see somebody else buying those books, they give them that same side eye. And I completely respect that perspective. I have absolutely seen people online who still insist that they are never going to touch another WotC product ever again, and, fair enough. I don't personally think it's the end of the world to buy a D&D book, but as I hope I've made clear, if it's a deal breaker for you, I get it. But it's important to remember that our frustration should always be with the creator who we feel is doing harm, and we don't necessarily need to tear each other apart over this stuff. Even with the Rowling example, where I will give a lot less grace than I do with D&D, I still don't jump down my friends' throats, because it's not going to be persuasive, it just alienates them from the cause. It sucks, but the best way to make it clear what behavior you expect from others is to model it yourself. I try to just tell my friends why I don't buy Harry Potter merch. I try to tell them why I don't shop at Home Depot or Target or Walmart, and if I have anything I need from those places, I try to instead go to Lowe's or Costco, because those former companies have capitulated to the current administration. They've thrown in their hat with ice in some really heinous ways. But I don't hate every Target shopper. The problem is the company's leadership. If you don't want to buy any products from Wizards of the Coast, that's fine. They more or less tried to kill the hobby. They may say that's not what they were trying to do, but we shouldn't trust them. Don't trust corporations. Even if you want to keep playing D&D without buying any books, the rules are available online for free. They were released in the Creative Commons. You might not get everything, but you'll still get enough to keep playing the new game without spending any money. I'm actually working on another video about how you can play this game completely for free, and how you can still spend money on the things that actually matter without having to buy the books. But also, if you and your friends just want to play D&D, you work hard all week and playing D&D makes you happy, I think that's perfectly fine. I try to always be critical of the behavior of a company, really any company, but especially large corporations, but quite frankly, I'm closer to 40 than 30. I have no interest in spending my time policing what other people do in most circumstances, especially when it comes to the games they play in their limited free time. I'm still playing 5.5 because, speaking purely personally, I still like the game. I don't view that as an endorsement of the company's other practices, because I think I'm pretty clear with how I feel about that company. I have a lot of respect for the designers, but I don't feel like I owe them their support. I don't pick up these books out of obligation to the good people who worked on D&D. I pick up the books that interest me when they interest me. But my rule, ever since the OGL, is that I'm only going to buy these books from brick and mortar gaming stores. If I'm going to spend money on D&D, I'm going to do so in a way that I know will also benefit a small business. So I took it down my Amazon wishlist a couple of years ago because I didn't want people buying me D&D books through Amazon just to expand my collection, when I can instead go seek out the books I'm the most interested in and support my friendly local gaming stores. Whenever possible, I also try to make sure I'm spending the same amount of money on a different RPG from another company. Ideally, also through a local store, because I really want to encourage that store to stock other games besides just D&D. Because while buying a $40 book might not make a huge difference for the folks at Wizards of the Coast, that money has a much more tangible impact on pretty much every other smaller publisher. When it comes to buying digital copies on D&D Beyond, that's obviously not something I can do at a local gaming store. I don't think I've picked up a book through D&D Beyond since the Monster Manual last year, but the next time I might need to do that, or at least feel like there's a book that interests me and I want a digital copy, that's another situation where I would also spend as much money as I can, equivalent amount of money on another product from some other company that's not D&D Beyond. And if I can't financially buy 2 books right now, if it's a lean month and I have to make a choice between a WotC product and something from another publisher, then I'll ask myself, okay, how badly do I need this D&D book right now? Can I just wait until I have enough money to also pick up a copy of Mothership or order a copy of Perils and Princesses? Now, the downside of that approach is that every time I pick up a new RPG product, I basically wind up with 2. I don't even have a bookshelf right now for any of my games in the house. Everything that I'm not currently reading at this moment is just in the closet or in the garage, and both those spaces have piles of RPG books I still want to talk about in this channel, but that I just haven't gotten around to yet. That actually brings me to my next topic. What does this pseudo edition war mean for DungeonTube? What does DungeonTube look like now? In 2023, it was a fantastic year to talk about other games on YouTube because people were really hungry for that kind of content. In 2024, videos about 5.5 did really well because people were trying to figure out if they wanted to buy the new edition or not. Now, nobody knows what's up. None of us has any idea what's going to be successful on this platform on any given day. But it does feel like maybe there is still a bit more of an opportunity these days to talk about other games. A lot of my fellow DungeonTubers are trying to talk about other games a little more often, to varying degrees of success, but we're still trying because we want to talk about the topics that excite us. Speaking personally, I've got a whole bunch of Daggerheart character creation videos I want to do this year. I want to dive more into their Game Master advice. I haven't really touched that whole section of the book at all. And considering I'm doing a lot more videos this year about story structure, and Daggerheart is a very story-driven game, I definitely want to talk more about the advice they have. I've also got a Shadow Dark character creation video I want to make, and probably more videos about that down the line, maybe some videos about the other zines, including the material from the Western Reaches Kickstarter. I haven't talked about Draw Steel at all on this channel yet, that's definitely still on the list. But I also still like D&D 5.5. I want to see it succeed and thrive and be a really good game, not just because it's good for the hobby when the most visible game is also a good product, but also because I like the game. So in my next video, I'm going to resume my character creation series. And for the first few installments, I'm going to use D&D 5e. I'm going to use the 2024 rules because I want to use those to make at least a few more videos before I start making characters in other games. But also, in one of my home games, our plan right now is to run this shorter D&D campaign, and then after that, we're going to try some other games. And so as I get a chance to play more games, I'm probably going to talk about them more often on the channel. Because I don't really have any interest in being an Edition Warrior, but I love being an Edition Ambassador.
So what you're ultimately saying is that it's not a problem to be critical of a new edition of a game, and it's not an issue to be critical of the company that puts it out, and it's fine to personally refrain from buying a product you're not interested in or you don't support on a moral level, but somebody only becomes an edition warrior when they start turning that frustration away from the people making the game and towards the individuals playing the game, and judging them as bad people for which games they play in their free time.
Exactly.
Well, I think I can understand that. I do hope to see you cover more games in the future, besides just D&D. I would hate to think that you're only covering D&D because you are afraid of change.
And you know what? Sometimes I worry about the exact same thing. I want to make sure that I'm not only playing D&D because it's what I'm comfortable with. I want to make sure that if I'm playing D&D, I'm doing so because I think that's the best system for that campaign. Because I can do things in that system that are harder to do in other systems, in other games. I don't just want to run D&D because it's the game everyone at the table already knows and no one's willing to put in the time or effort to learn one other game. Especially if you consider the fact that lots of other games are just as easy to learn as D&D is, and also lots of them are even easier to learn. But that being said, I'm also aware that I have a little bit more responsibility to use my platform to promote other games besides just the biggest game in the hobby. If someone else is just running a home game and they don't personally have the time or the energy to look into other RPGs, so they just play D&D because it's what they're comfortable with, that's completely fine. I don't think that's a big deal. But this is literally my job. I'm in the perfect position to spend more time talking about other systems, so I do want to make sure that I do that some more this year.
Well, then I approve. Although, I'm not sure you needed to stage this whole scripted conflict in order to make your point.
Yeah, I suppose this was a little theatrical, and I guess I shouldn't be that surprised that you're not a big fan of the theater. that you're not a big fan of the theater.
What an asshole.
Well, that's one way to defeat the monster of the week, I guess. Probably won't be able to do that every time. I doubt it'll work. Unless there's another supernatural being who looks like a $50, I guess. But yeah, in my next video, we're going to make a character using the new 5th edition rules, the 2024 rules, as we're going to return to my character creation series. Because I made a whole bunch of videos about the different aspects of D&D you can use to inspire your own character creation. And for a while, I've been basically going through the list of options presented to you during character creation and seeing what would happen if you used one of those as the foundation for a new character. What happens if you start with a class, start with a race, start with a background, start with a feat, all that kind of stuff. And there are lots of other ways to create characters. We'll talk about more of those throughout the year. But there is one more aspect of the cool rulebook that I haven't touched on yet that is kind of a major part of character creation, at least it was for me. And I haven't done it yet as a starting point, and I think it could be very interesting to see what happens if we actually treat that aspect of character creation as the starting point for building a brand new character. Thanks so much for watching. This is the unscripted part of the video where I tell you that I did not think this was going to be a long video either. I need to start making shorter videos. In the meantime, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel so you can see those other videos I have coming out, ring the bell. That really does help, actually, because then you get notified about a new video. It pops up on your phone, and you're like, oh, a new video from Super Geek Mike. I'm going to watch it right now, which the earlier people watch a video, the better it is for the channel, which is fantastic. Other cool stuff you can do, there's a newsletter down there. I should send out another newsletter. I'll probably do that pretty soon once I get these other videos out this week. And then I also want you to have a great day. Yeah, this is unscripted, and I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this, but for now I'm doing it. A new Patreon live stream coming next Monday, the first Monday in March, let's say. Unless I change my mind. But for now, that's the plan. And anything else to say? No, I don't think so. And so I'm just going to say, until next time, play fair and have fun.